Hello YouTube! Today I have for you a game I played 2 days ago on the 8th of April 2016. My opponent was white, I was black, and my opponent is rated around 1800, but he recently beat a 2100 player, so I knew I had to watch out for him. Okay, let's start the game. My opponent started the game with e4, and I played my favorite line, d5, the Scandinavian defense. And from here on the main line was pursued, namely e takes d5 and knight to f6. Okay, my opponent here has a couple of options. Let's say d4, c4, also knight to c3, bishop to b5 and knight to c3. All of these moves are played before, and my opponent chose the option for knight to f3 here. And here black also has a couple of options. Of course I can take either way on d5, but I like to play here into a pet line of mine, which is the move bishop to g4, pinning the knight on f3. Alright, best here probably for white is move to c4 or bishop to b5, but my opponent here liked to play actively and he didn't care much for his d5 pawn, so he played the move d4, which is also fine. But here we go into one of my favorite pet lines, and I have a really good score with this, and my opponent didn't know this, so I had a little edge here. Queen captures on d5. The most obvious move here was played by white, knight to c3, attacking the queen, and the queen has to move. And instead of going to a5, I like to play my queen to the other side of the board and start putting pressure on the knight on f3, and from there on have a nice and attacking game. So queen to h5. Okay, my opponent here played bishop to e2, getting out of the pin, and all the moves here are actually quite easy, just playing actively. So knight to c6, bishop to f4, and I castled on the queen side. Black here, after this move, castling queen side, has fully equalized. And the next move made by my opponent I considered personally a mistake. I engine checked it and it seems to be fine, but white will have some troubles and it's not easy to find a way, the correct way out of it. My opponent here played queen to d2, preparing also to castle on the queen side. And here I fought for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes. How can I stop my opponent from castling on the queen side? Because I want to have as much pressure as I can on my opponent. And quickly I noticed something, which was also played. So I will first play the first move. I captured the pawn on d4, which is a temporary piece sacrifice. My opponent has to capture, because if he doesn't...
You want to take that back? Alright, I didn't see nothing.
If he wants to castle on the queen side here, then knight to b3 will be check and white loses the queen. Also castling on the king side here isn't an option, because if my opponent castles on the king side, there will be knight captures f3 and also the queen will be lost. So my opponent has to capture, which he played, and of course after that e5 is a fork on both the bishop and the knight is pinned, so it can't move. My opponent here played correctly, played f3 and attacked my bishop. And here I also had to think for a little bit, because a move like queen to h4 isn't a good move. Then there will be bishop to g3 and white will be winning. So that's not an option. Also there's the option of captures the bishop, which is probably fine, because then after captures the bishop on g4 there will be queen to h4 check, and pawn to g3 is not really an option because you can still capture it with your pawn on f4. But after a little while I thought, why not play the most aggressive move available here, and that is capturing the knight with the rook, attacking the queen immediately. White only has one option here, and that is to capture my bishop and attacking my queen, and only here there is only one option, and it is to capture the pawn back with the knight. As you can see in this position, white is down 2 pawns but is up a piece, but black is the one attacking and the king of white is still in the center. So it's still not very clear how white should proceed here. The best move, and this I also considered while playing the game, for white should be pawn to h3, because then the threat will be bishop captures on g4 and winning the queen of black, and moves to get out of the pin on the knight of g4 like queen to h4 will be met with probably pawn to g3, and black is seriously in trouble. So those aren't really options. Luckily my opponent blundered here, because you will need to find the move pawn to h3. If you don't, white is in serious trouble, and my opponent couldn't find the correct move here. He immediately captured my knight, and after this black is up for a very easy game. I recaptured the bishop because it was check, and now the queen has to move, which means the bishop on f4 is also lost. So after queen to e2, queen captures the bishop on f4, and black is up 2 pawns for nothing. Also the king is still in the center from white, so there's not much counterplay going on here, but my opponent at least tried. Okay. He played the move g3, attacking the queen. Now where can the queen go? Now there are a lot of options, of course, like going to g4 trying to trade the queens, but if that happens my opponent has the option to castle queenside and maybe fight on for a little bit. I preferably would like to see that my opponent would not be able to castle queenside at all. So that wasn't one of my considerations. I like to play the move queen to f5 here, still looking at the sensitive e4 square, so a knight move isn't an option for white, but rook to f1 is of course attacking the queen. Here I continued the game with the move queen to d7, still defending f7 but releasing the defense of pawn on e5, but white should not dare capture, for then bishop to b4 and rook to e8 will probably be devastating. White continued his play with knight to b5. Finally the control on e4 is lost, so his knight can finally move. Attacking the rook on d4, also attacking the pawn on a7, but I think that's not really a problem. So rook to d5, defending the pawn on e5 again and also attacking the knight on b5. White defends with a4, black attacks the knight with a6, and here white plays the move c3. That means that white actually is prepared to sacrifice the knight for a possible mate threat on a8. Well, since I don't like to give my opponents any form of counterplay when I'm in a good position, I didn't really want to take the knight here. First I wanted to eliminate all possible counterplay my opponent could have. So I started out with the move pawn to f6, defending the pawn on e5. So, and also of course the pawn on f6 is now defended by the pawn on g7, so all the pawns are safe. White continues with pawn to b4, starting an aggressive pawn push, and here I played the move pawn to h5, which defends the square g4, for if I was ever to take the knight on b5, then I would have to play queen takes, for else it will be checkmate on a8. And after that there would be the possibility for queen g4 check, and I didn't like the signs of a possible counterplay. So that's why I played pawn to h5. My opponent here didn't realize what I was doing and made his final mistake of the game. He played h4. Well, my preparations to eliminate all counterplay are done, so now I can finally take the knight on b5, and I did. My opponent took back with the pawn, queen takes, also threatening to trade off queens. My opponent didn't want to trade queens, so he played queen to e4, but after the move queen to d3, my opponent was forced to resign here. There is no form of any counterplay, since also the square f5 is now covered by my queen, and I'm up 2 pawns and a piece now. So all in all, actually it was an easy game. I would like to go back a couple of moves to the situation where white actually made his mistake, which was here. First of all, I would like to hear from any of you how many of you would actually play the move h3 here, and what would your response be. So if h3 was played, there are 2 options for black, and both still are actually kinda equal. The option of immediately rook captures on d2, after which white will have to capture the knight on g4, queen takes, pawn takes, and rook captures on c2, where black will be up 3 pawns for the piece. But white has still his king in the center, and it's not so easy to see, not so clear on what the actual plan of white will be. Also there's the option of immediately playing f5, defending the knight. Now the knight can't be captured, but white can play very tactically and a very strong move here, and it is castling queenside, after which rook will capture the queen, bishop will capture, but the knight on g4 will still be pinned and lost, so white actually will be up after queen to f7, pawn takes, and the move f4. White will be up a bishop, a knight and a rook against a queen and 2 pawns. This will also be very close to equal, but I prefer white actually in this position. So I would like to hear your opinions. What would you play after the move h3? Or would you play as white anything else. Okay, thank you all, leave a like and